Dallas, as we go to a clip of the new film that's just premiered in the United States, that's directed by Avi Lewis and written by Naomi Klein, based on her best-selling book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate. The film, This Changes Everything.
Can I be honest with you? I've always kind of hated films about climate change. What is it about those vanishing glaciers and desperate polar bears that makes me want to click away? Is it really possible to be bored by the end of the world? It's not that I don't care what happens to polar bears. It's just that we're told that the cause isn't out there, it's in us. It's human nature. We're innately greedy and short-sighted. And if that's true, there is no hope. But when I finally stopped looking away, traveled into the heart of the crisis, met people on the front lines, I discovered so much of what I thought I knew was wrong. And I began to wonder, what if human nature isn't the problem? What if even greenhouse gases aren't the problem? What if the real problem is a story, one we've been telling ourselves for 400 years?
That's Naomi Klein in the new film, This Changes Everything. Now we're going to the segment in the film that looks at the smog crisis in China.
Previously, the environment issues are just peanuts. We can deal with it when we become rich enough. And then we had this historical moment of smog disaster. It totally changed the landscape of environment discussion in China.
Have you ever seen a star in the sky?
没有.
No.
What about a blue sky?
I've seen one that's a little blue.
你见过白云?
What about clouds?
没有.
No.
Chai Jing's film, Under the Dome, was online for just 1 week before the Chinese government took it down. In that week, it was viewed in China more than 200 million times.
这是2014年.
This is every day of 2014 in Beijing. I couldn't take my daughter outside when it was smoggy. How often was that?
污染天数100.
175 days were polluted.
You know, when you wake up in the morning and you kind of walk out in the street, kind of walk out because you can't breathe. People are saying, no, this cannot be the way society in the world is supposed to be about.
Lanzhou, 112 polluted days in 2014. Chengdu, 125 polluted days. Shenyang, 152. Tianjin, 197.
Air pollution has really become a very big topic in China, and the rising middle class people in China, you know, after their living standards in many ways have improved a lot, now start to ask, when can we buy clean air?
From the film, This Changes Everything. Avi Lewis is the director. Avi, China.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I felt
the images are unbelievable.
It's so striking, and you know, but this is the model of galloping economic growth, and now people are literally choking on that growth, and it's the #1 issue in China. I mean, we like to sort of let ourselves off the hook. It's not, you know, we can't do anything about it now. China's the biggest emitter; they consume half the world's coal, and it's all about China. They're building a coal plant every week. Those figures aren't entirely true anymore. China's curtailing its coal use dramatically. This year, the last coal-fired power plant in Beijing will be retired. Last year was the first time this century that coal use in China declined, and yet they have this, they're choking on this crisis of pollution, and the environment is the #1 issue for people in China. The government knows it, and there's a growing movement right at the grassroots level of protests and activism in China. You know, it's not easy to be an activist in China, but there are huge pushbacks from local communities around all sorts of pollution disasters and industrial plants. And so there's things happening in China, and the government is responding with really tough climate policies, much more than countries like the United States. The explosion of renewable energy in China.
The response of the government now to actually be almost in the forefront now of attempting to make changes and at the world level in terms of
question.
emissions.
I mean, the price of solar panels has dropped 75% in the last 6 years, largely because China has supported that industry so massively.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the days of the Chinese government being able to say, well, it's our turn to pollute, at UN conferences. That's over, and it's not because of anything that's happened at the United Nations. It's because of what's happening inside China and that internal pressure. So, I think one of the things that the film does very, very well, and I give Avi full credit for this because sort of less present in the books, the two big shoots that they did in India and China, and very deliberately, because we know, first of all, not just because this is where emission growth is coming, but also because this is our excuse, in countries like Canada and the U.S. to say, well, we can't do anything because of what's going on there. So what the film really does is explode any kind of claim that these are monolithic, trends. And, in India, there's a very powerful story about the amount of resistance to building new coal-fired power plants.
India is on track to surpass China in population,
and is surpassing China in air pollution. But the point is, there's huge grassroots resistance, and we often don't hear about the resistance in China and India to the same kind of resistance that we have here against new extractive projects like the Keystone XL pipeline or coal export terminals, or building new dirty projects. People are rising up here. They're rising up there too, and those two forces are really supporting each other. There's an Indian company has been trying to build the world's largest coal mine in Australia. Adani has been trying to build the Carmichael mine, which would be the largest, if built, the largest coal mine in the world. But they are facing this pincer of resistance in India, where the coal would go, and huge resistance in Australia. And now it looks like that mine will never be built.
And that resistance is what you both convey so well in This Changes Everything, the whole notion of blockadia. Let's go back to the film.
Thank you, guys. We have completely encircled the White House.
All around the world, people aren't just writing to their politicians, politely asking them to do the right thing. They're taking direct action, demanding it. On the front lines, they call it blockadia. The idea behind it is simple. We're in a hole, and before anything new can grow, we have to stop digging. As the drilling rigs and pipelines crisscross the earth, so does blockadia, connecting communities along the way. The metal pathways of dirty energy confronted by this new web of resistance.
So, it's the first night being here in this pipe.
And I've noticed something else. At the forefront are the people from the sacrifice zones, the very ones who have been written off for hundreds of years. The keepers of that other story.
If this pipeline goes through, your government will further assist in the raping and pillaging of the lands of my ancestors. Then they'll promise to give us back what was never theirs in the first place. Don't be fooled by their ideology of what reclamation is. Reclamation is me standing here with the 99%. We're here today to say we never went anywhere, and nor do we plan to.
When you see communities who are thrown into the front line because an environmental or political or economic issue is imposed on them, you see the incredible transformation that happens. They become stronger, they stand up. And you're like, Isn't this incredible? Isn't this the society we want?
A clip from This Changes Everything, directed by Avi Lewis, narrated and written by Naomi Klein, based on Naomi's book, This Changes Everything, Sacrifice Zones. Naomi, explain.
Well, sacrifice zones, yeah, it's a theme that comes up again and again, and it's a phrase that actually used to be sort of an acceptable phrase used by the U.S. government about how there might have to be some areas which would just be sacrifice areas, energy sacrifice areas, and in fact, the Powder River Basin was discussed as one in Montana. But the argument we make in the film is that fossil fuels have always, since their very beginning of powering our economies on an industrial scale with coal, required sacrifice zones, because this is an inherently dirty and polluting energy process. So the first sacrifice zones were the black lungs of the coal miners, and the soot, over cities like Manchester and London. We told ourselves some sort of story that there's this natural cleaning up process as capitalism evolves. It naturally cleans itself up. And look at the air in London now, and look at LA. The argument we make in the film is, we didn't move beyond pollution. We just moved the pollution, and now it is in China, and now it is in India, and there's way more of it. And we are all in the sacrifice zone now. That idea that there are some places that just have to be sacrificed in order for industrial progress to continue is an idea that just keeps growing and growing and growing until the people who thought they were safe are no longer safe. And in the film, I guess we make the argument that Hurricane Sandy hitting New York City was the ultimate example of that, because this sacrifice zone mentality is often about talking about the middle of nowhere. And indeed, it hit the center of everywhere.
Let's go, if we can, to a clip from This Changes Everything about Hurricane Sandy.
I may have just scooped it a little.
7 days.
I didn't realize you were going to do that.
Filmed 7 days after the storm in the Rockaways in New York.
When the weather hit, it was a wake-up call. It was really like, wow. People holding on dear for life, holding on to the poles, the gates. People, the water pushing them out their houses, the walls caving. It's really, really crazy.
I put everything in the first floor. Nobody ever told me that the flood insurance go from the second floor up. The whole first floor went, everything. I don't have even one penny in my pocket.
We are doing everything that we can, and it's not enough, because the size of this problem is too huge. We're not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to be trying to rescue people that are stuck in apartment buildings, dying because of lack of medication.
Areas that are the hardest hit are the most marginalized, are the poorest communities, some of the poorest communities in New York City, right? There's like hundreds and hundreds of people that are trapped up in these buildings. And there's no attention for them. There's no clinics, there's no care.
We have a disaster where we're supposed to have agencies tasked with addressing these needs. Just like Katrina, it's not woefully inadequate, it's a travesty. FEMA, useless. Red Cross, useless.
Avi?
Well, you see what happened in New York. We had this economic justice movement called Occupy, and when the storm hit, where was the government? Just like in Katrina, people who were already focused on the core of the economic system and the need for system change showed up to be the best disaster first responders. Those people were from Occupy Sandy. They were already organizing in the communities, most marginalized communities that were hit, that are going to be on the front lines of the climate crisis, that already are. So you really see people filling in the gaps for the retreat of government, this ideological project of the last 3-4 decades, and people naming and shaming the core logic of our economic system. We got to change everything.
That does it for our show, but we're going to do a post-show, and we'll post online at democracynow.org. Avi Lewis, director, Naomi Klein, writer, and on whom the film is based. She's the narrator of the film. This changes everything. It's opening in New York tonight at the IFC Theater, and then all over the country.